I mean, I've seen a lot of people saying hang them, kill them, cut off his privates, but this is completely retributive.
I feel that sometimes your work is like that Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain where you're constantly falling down, again going up, falling down, because it's a huge problem.
When I see the things that happen to them, and we hear these on a daily basis. Now, I've had people who come and say, Milani, I don't know how you're listening to these stories on a daily basis.
Sometimes the perpetrator is not the stereotypical male neighbor. It could be a female. It could even be a child, another child.
From the cases that we receive, the higher number is sexual abuse. And also that more boys are sexually abused than girls. Boys who are abused at a young age sometimes tend to become a perpetrator later.
And these young kids are getting hurt, it's not acknowledged, they're out there, and what they take it out on, whether they become perpetrators themselves or whether they hurt themselves or they're hurting somebody else in a different way. These are all hurts and pains that are not like dealt with a lot of the time. And
our criminal justice process is such that it looks like it's more favourable to the perpetrator, right, and not to the victim. And
hello and welcome to the Debrief. Joining us today is Milani Salpitikorala, an attorney at law who founded the Child Protection Force. Milani has been working untiringly towards protecting the rights of children, and we'd like to discuss with her the landscape for children and their rights in Sri Lanka. Hi Milani.
Hi.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I've been waiting to talk to you.
Thank you for having me here.
No problem. I just wanted to start perhaps with the Child Protection Force itself. What does it do? Like, what exactly do you all do?
So, Child Protection Force is essentially a legal aid service for children, because when a crime against a child occurs, it is a crime against the state. If it is a crime that comes under the Penal Code of Sri Lanka, that means it's a crime against the state. So, it doesn't necessarily have to be a child. Any other crime is a crime against the state. So, the child is represented in court by the police officer. Right? So there is no legal representation as such, like a civil case where you have to retain a legal professional. So what I mean from my studies and what I've noticed from long time ago was the fact that when the child is not represented by a lawyer, the other factors like, is the child ready to be present in court? Is the evidence presented properly? Are there other issues? Are there other caregivers who may be able to support? All these other aspects are not looked into, you know, which is why I thought, you know what, we need this legal aid service for children to be represented in court. So essentially, yes, we are a legal aid service for children, but we also realized throughout our work that just representing the child in court is not enough. Sometimes they come from far away. They haven't had breakfast or they haven't had a meal for the past, you know, day or so. So the simple things like buying them breakfast, sitting down with them and asking them whether they've had a good night's sleep, that whole psychosocial aspect also is very important. So we provide psychological support for the child and the family, and also other support. So if the child is going to school or not, so we make all those arrangements, and other types of therapy as well. So there is this one child who is used almost as a sex slave, 12-year-old girl. When I first met her, I noticed that she has this amazing animal instinct. The way she touches her animals and pets them and handles them. So then I thought maybe I'm going to try taking her for horse riding at Ceylon Riders Club. And Inaka was absolutely amazing, and she said, you know what, just let her come, free of charge. We'll see if, you know, she heals. So these type of, it all depends on a case by case basis also. So with the legal service, that whole psychosocial service also.
Okay, but how did you get into this? Like I'm assuming you studied for your law exams and you were a lawyer who could have got into criminal, into the criminal justice system, or could have joined a firm, could have got into commercial law, any kind of other kind of law. What made you go into this sort of thing and do this?
So any kind of other law would have been preferable because I'd get like a
proper
chunk of money.
Paycheck.
Yes. But no, so I became a lawyer by default.
Okay.
Parents are lawyers, so child becomes a lawyer. That kind of. I wanted to be a vet.
Right.
Yeah.
Wasn't allowed.
Yes. But then I started working as my father passed away. So he was like mentor, lawyer, daughter. Always in his office. He passed just before I did my final exams. So then I started working for Justice Milani Salpitikorala, who is also a major child and women's rights activist. So that is where I guess the passion built up. And she introduced me to a lawyer called Sajiva Samarnayaka, who passed away a few years ago. So he was also my mentor, and this complete, he used to call himself a social working lawyer.
Right.
So not a lawyer in the traditional sense, but a social worker also. So I think that is what I am now, and that is what my entire team is. I just showed you a picture of one of my junior lawyers holding a baby, and So
how big is your team?
We have 3 permanent members, including myself, and the entire team with the consultants is about 6 of us in total.
So that's not a huge team, and that's a large problem you're trying to tackle. A few follow-up questions. I also know that you're a mom. You have 2 children. How do you manage your time? Because I follow you on social media and I see that you're always running here and there, responding to a case that has come in, responding to stories of children who have been abused. But there's also 2 children who are demanding your attention. They need school, tuition, all of this. How do you manage to keep it all together?
So I've just told my husband also yesterday that 24 hours of the day is not enough for me. But we manage. He's a massive support. He helps me a lot with the children. Otherwise, the children are also always in my office. If I'm not out, they're with me in office. If I have to go outstation on work, they tag along. The one thing that kills me is online school, because you have to sit with the child. It's not like you drop them off and come back, because they're small. But we manage, mostly because of my husband also, who is also major support with the children. And
the foundation, the Child Protection Force, it can't be easy to run it in terms of finances, right? Because there's an actual cost to helping each of these children. How do you manage to keep the finances afloat? I know it's a tough, one of the toughest things I think that you're dealing with, but how do you keep it going?
So I think until recently, I never took a salary, and also I pumped a lot of my own money. I know this is going to go out, and my brother and sister, my family is also going to see this, but they also do know that I pumped a lot of my own money. But there had to come a time when I had to stop, because I have to build a house. I need to spend for my own children as well. I have some amazing friends who have been supporting, and also few organizations like Facebook Inc. and some German organizations who are really helping, not in the traditional sense of donor funding kind of, but by observing the work we do, and they've on and off helped with a little bit. So I believe that the moment I go down to zero, the next day something comes in and we get in a fund from someone. So it has been okay so far.
And what are the values that drive you? Like, what is it that drives you to do this to this degree?
You see, children from the purest, I think it became more after I had my own, and to see how pure children are. And when I see the things that happen to them, and we hear these on a daily basis. Now I've had people who come and say, Milani, I don't know how you're listening to these stories on a daily basis. So it's extremely difficult. And then when you see a child and the child is so pure, right? There has to be some good in the world, right? So, and our responsibility as adults is to try to find this good and spread it around. And even if it's a perpetrator, to me, I feel, I mean, I've seen a lot of people saying hang them, kill them, cut off his privates. But this is completely retributive. And the more you fight it, it's never going to end. They're going to also say we put him in prison for 20 years. The person is going to be angry. But even though we restrict his movements in prison, but also take him or her through a rehabilitative process. So a complete psychological, turnaround. That is what is needed. Mental health is essential.
And mental health has a lot to do with this entire area that you're working in, because when it comes to perpetrators, obviously there's some mental health issue there, and even the victims themselves have to end up undergoing a lot of trauma that takes years sometimes to work through. So it's almost linked hand in hand with the work that you do. So let's talk about the actual social issue of child abuse. What are the types of child abuse that occur?
So sexual abuse, and that is what people talk about the most.
Okay.
But also physical abuse. I think yesterday something ran up on social media about a child being physically abused. Emotional abuse and neglect. So neglect is, say for example, both parents are druggies and you find the child being neglected at home and both of them are, high or passed out on drugs. So that is enough to charge them against neglect of a child.
Right. And what is the most prevalent of these types of abuse? So what is the highest recorded?
So for us, also from the cases that we receive, the higher number is sexual abuse.
Okay.
And also that more boys are sexually abused than girls.
Right. And is it a specific, do you have to give some kind of specific psychosocial help or anything when it comes to boys? Is it any different when you're dealing with a boy as opposed to a girl? Perhaps because society doesn't even acknowledge?
Society doesn't acknowledge it. So most of the boys, they don't come out, they don't say that they've been sexually abused. So it's always either if the mother found out in a different way. And yeah, it is kind of different because the girl will always come in most of the time, even with us, even with the psychologist. She has felt that it is easier to talk to girls because boys tend to close up, you know. But so far with our cases with boys, we're slowly getting them to open up, slowly sending them for, martial arts classes, boxing, swimming and all that, also because we want them to let that energy out. Because almost always we have also found out that boys who are abused at a young age sometimes tend to become a perpetrator later.
Correct.
So there was one of our boys who was talking about that perpetrator behavior. So Uttara is doing a lot of work trying to,
I mean, it's really sad because what we're talking about is people going out there into society. And when I say society, it's not an abstract, it's the society we all live in. And these young kids are getting hurt, it's not acknowledged, they're out there, and what they take it out on, whether they become perpetrators themselves or whether they hurt themselves or they're hurting somebody else in a different way. These are all hurts and pains that are not dealt with a lot of the time. And I always wonder, because I feel that sometimes your work is like that Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain where you're constantly falling down again, going up, falling down, because it's a huge problem. And there's no, when I say no acknowledgement from society, there's also no acknowledgement from authorities even to how dire and deep this problem is. So it's great that you keep plugging at it untiringly.
Yesterday I was extremely frustrated. I even posted about one of our cases where it looks very dim for the victim. And our criminal justice process is such that it looks like it's more favourable to the perpetrator, and not to the victim, and is not at all child friendly. So it is that.
Yeah, that constant. Just tell me about this juvenile justice system, because I know that you work a lot with it. What does it look like at the moment?
I mean, I'd always want to give it what it is. I mean, want it to be a bit positive, but unfortunately it's not at all child friendly.
Right.
So the most amount of re-victimization,
Okay.
where children would have to say, put the lawyer out of the picture. So if a child is subject to abuse and goes with the grandmother or the mother, starting from the police station, which is the first respondent, right? To then go into the judicial medical officer, the probation officer, and then finally to court. It's a long, difficult process, right? I mean, I'd use a singular word, katta kandone.
Yeah.
Right? It's very difficult, and you know, not everyone is privileged. So maybe they haven't eaten. It's always important for me that my clients have their bellies full.
Yeah.
You know, and they're tired. They haven't slept. They come from far away. They use public transport. It's an extremely difficult process to go and sit and wait for hours and hours and hours. Being a victim yourself, it should be the other way around. You should be treated like royalty and taken through the process.
Correct.
And of course, I mean, it is the burden on the prosecution to prove the case.
Correct.
The defense can even keep quiet if they want to.
Right. That makes it much harder.
It's very hard.
And then you have to recount your story endless times.
Endless times. So at the police station, sometimes to the first officer who listens, then that officer will say, okay, you need to write it here, so then you need to repeat it again. Then the OIC will call you in, so you go and meet the OIC and repeat it again 3 times there. Then you go to the judicial medical officer, there again, probation officer 5 times already.
Yeah.
Then, you know,
Yeah.
so it's a extremely child unfriendly system. So which is what we are also trying to do, is to make it more holistic towards the child, a child friendly system. Completely, I mean, a different day at least in the magistrates courts.
Correct, for children.
For children, yeah.
And how many people do you think just drop out of the system without even coming forward because of this entire long process?
Oh, many.
Yeah.
So we started in 2017. When we started, we had about 40 cases. I think now we have close to 100, 150 active cases going on.
Okay.
But throughout the process, we've seen a lot of our clients just gone missing. We can't contact them. So we appear for them in court, but we can't find the clients. They're not, you know, they've completely changed locations. They're going on with their own lives, so they've dropped out.
And that system leaves then many more vulnerable people out.
Absolutely, because the perpetrator is almost always out on bail.
Correct.
So he's out there with access to a lot of other children.
Yeah. And was there ever a discussion on perhaps setting up a separate court for children or anything like that ever in the past? Was there
so there are 2 separate courts for children, one in Jaffna, one in Battaramulla. These are juvenile magistrates courts, but these courts don't have the jurisdiction to punish.
Okay.
Their only jurisdiction is for the care and protection of the child.
Right.
So when a case comes along, the criminal case is with regard to the perpetrator and the punishment and all that. And there is a care and protection, where the child is going to be placed, who is she or he safe with, whether the child is going to be put into a probation home and so on. So these 2 courts only have that jurisdiction to place the child.
Right.
Yeah,
because it's sad. I mean, one of the big topics right now is setting up a separate court at the port city to facilitate and fast track business, which is important. But how much more would we be investing in our own country and our own people if we set up a separate court to look into the criminal aspect of the juvenile justice system?
Absolutely. So I mean, what we are advocating for is setting up entire separate buildings is going to take a long time. At least set up a different day, one particular day for child related cases only per week.
Yeah.
So in some courts, magistrates courts, there are some courts use Friday as a date for children. So maintenance, custody, sorry, not custody, that's in the DC, maintenance, child matters, child abuse and all these things on Fridays.
Okay.
So if that can be done, that'll be great.
Change.
Yeah.
Right. Let's talk about so something that many people don't see or don't talk about because these cases are not easily discussed in public, is that sometimes the perpetrator is not the stereotypical male neighbor. It could be a female, it could even be a child, another child. How do you deal with the situation in which the perpetrator itself is a child?
So that's really difficult because once this is reported and the perpetrator is also a child, we know that he needs to go through a whole psychiatric or psychological healing. But once this is reported, the child is then, the police will call the probation department and the child will be taken into probation services. And there are homes called remand homes for child offenders.
Okay.
And he is taken through this whole child offender process, and there is no different system for child offenders and adult offenders. So it's a normal criminal justice process. And this is something that I'm also trying to do a massive research on because in England or in other countries, I mean, I've studied the British system, but also in other countries like Singapore and so on, when it is a young offender, so it doesn't have to be a sexual offense, I mean, whatever, if it is a young offender, they are taken through a justice system called the restorative justice system.
Right.
So they're not punished, they don't go through, they don't stay behind bars in prison and all these cufflinks and all that. But their movement is restrained. So either they'll be house arrested or they have these special facilities, but they're allowed to study.
Right.
They can, do their O-levels, they can do their exams. Also a whole load of psychosocial therapy for them.
Yes.
And everyone is brought to the table. So the perpetrator, the victim, their families, government officials, everyone sits down and they go through this system called restorative justice because the whole meaning is to restore it.
Yeah.
So that both the victim enters society healed and the offender also enters society into a state of normalcy.
Correct.
Rather than say at the age of 15 you're named as an offender, you're put into prison, and that is what you will be for the rest of your life.
Correct, because you'll be taking that forward with you, that stigma and that sort of identification. I guess the offender also identifies as a perpetrator.
Trying to work this out into the Sri Lankan system. So for example, where the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of Youth Affairs will collaborate and have this what we call a youth justice board. So when it is a youth offender, it doesn't go to the courts, but this is like a mediation kind of thing where he will come there and they will issue the sentence. So either social services for the next 5 years where you go and you clean the beach with your probation officer for the next 5 years.
So you pay some sort of penance. But
exactly. Also giving them that sense of responsibility. Okay, I've done something wrong. This is my chance to fix it.
Talking about being known as an offender, whether it's a child or an adult, a conversation that cropped up lately was this sex offenders list and whether Sri Lanka should have a sex offenders list. What's your opinion on that?
I think that would be great if it is. Because like I said, I'll give you an example of one of our cases. So this neighborhood guy, older man, raped and sexually abused 2 boys and a girl, neighboring children. And the girl was sent to a probation home because her parents, the family dynamics weren't that great. But the 2 boys are still there. The 2 boys are going through severe psychological issues. This man came out on bail in 2 weeks. Right? He's back in that same neighborhood.
Right.
Okay, so if there was a sex offenders list, the rest of the neighborhood would know that this man is a sex offender. But only thing is, the case is still going on.
Right.
So I don't know whether the sex offender list comes out, your name gets into the list after you are sentenced, convicted, or whether
it should be
from the beginning when you were an accused party. So
because the cases take quite a while, right? Sometimes 10 to 15 years, you were saying.
Yes.
And that's a long time to wait, a long time during which, like you were saying, perpetrators can just go ahead and hurt other people. And I mean, just listening to this, it seems like such an inefficient solution and system already.
So I've actually had a conversation with the child rights lawyers in Singapore, and their cases with regard to child rights are heard and concluded within 3 to 6 months.
Right.
So the order is given, the final sentencing, everything is done within 3 to 6 months.
Right.
So I mean that's a country with a very low crime rate against children.
Yeah.
So I mean these are things that we can easily adopt.
Yeah. Because there's nothing standing in the way of being able to conclude a case in 6 months. So you just
Absolutely.
There's so much that you can do in that period. Moving to another thing that cropped up on social media very recently, just in the last week, was the contents of the physical education, health and physical education textbook, grade 11 textbook, where some of the things that the public said were the concept of consent was not discussed, but particularly the fact that rape was seen as something that could be the victim's fault, and people on social media said that this, I mean very rightly, said that this is what brings about rape culture, when you don't teach children what consent is, what rape is and stuff like how important. And I think especially because this ties into your line of work and children and how they're taught at a very young age, how important do you think it is for these educational textbooks to set these things right?
No, I mean these textbooks are key.
Yes.
And I read that.
Yeah.
Okay, it is complete victim blaming. So I mean I think that they need to, okay, so it is a health and science textbook. Probably there are professionals within the department who are, you know, health and science professionals, but don't you also need to get certain people look into these books, like child rights professionals, lawyers, people who are working within the system of, you know, criminal justice. You can get a criminal justice lawyer to read it.
Yes.
So the fact that I think these things are neglected, not proofread properly, because I'm sure if Arita or myself or even a very good criminal justice lawyer like Harsha Nanayakara would read that, would immediately cut that off.
Correct, be able to see it.
Yeah.
So there's lots that can be done.
Absolutely, and these are not rocket science. No?
Yes, correct.
Simple things that can be.
And this textbook has been out there for a while, until it was brought up on social media last week. Lots of people didn't even know, even as parents, lots of parents didn't know what was in there.
And you know, the whole Sri Lankan, our culture is God worshipping, the patriarchal, you know, symbol. So when young boys read that, they would think, okay, she was just like that, so it was okay for me, or she was drunk.
Correct.
I mean, I know many women my age who have recently opened up to me saying, I was drunk and I was raped.
Yeah.
So
and so that very important concept of consent is just not taught at all to children.
And these are things that actually came out from the Think Equal program.
Yes, which was a few years ago.
I mean, I think a lot of money was spent on these books and, you know, having them printed out and all that, but I think these systems just washed off. But Think Equal was an amazing program at early childhood education itself. I mean, both my kids were pilot students of Think Equal, and you'd see the difference in how they are emotionally, you know,
equipped to deal with these challenging a question when a question arises. Even. So, looking at child rights and or not even the rights, child abuse as a large social problem, what you are doing is, as far as possible, you are giving legal aid and legal help. But that's just one aspect. If you looked at the entire social problem, what other factors do you think need to come into play together to tackle this problem of child abuse?
So one thing is, what we are doing is protection. So that is after something has happened, we protect the victim. But what we need to concentrate on prevention. So educate the masses. So this can be done through the education system, through the health system, you know, and through family planning, through everything. I think every part of society, or, you know, Sri Lankan dynamics, we have a part to play with child safety. So we have recently launched a program called the Child Force Trooper, where we go and train the community on child safety, then when something happens, how to respond to it, and so on. So they will, from the village level, they will start spreading awareness, they will start looking into children who don't go to school, and so on. So I think the most important thing is also the family unit, be it a single parent, be it grandma and children, but that family unit to be strengthened. And as a state, we have a responsibility through the Child Rights Convention to support the family unit and to not take children and put them in probation homes and say, look, our probation homes are good and you know, we're taking care of our children. No, rather to let them be in that family unit and strengthen the family unit, because that is where the best protection for the child is.
Yeah. So I think the entire system can be sort of rehauled and reworked a little bit. It's not like it's as backward as some of the other legal systems we're working with. It's just that it needs a tweaking and a change, so it's more restorative than retributive, and there's also maybe shorter, like you were saying, within 3 to 6 months. I feel like it's so close.
Absolutely.
From talking to you, I feel like it's so close that you can reach out and get it done.
Yes.
It's just that it requires maybe a few things falling in place. And I really hope what you said about working together with the Youth Ministry and the Justice Ministry, because if those two entities got together, especially at a time like this, I think they could make the change in a way that will benefit
Absolutely, because there are quite a lot of young offenders in remand homes, and I know a few of them personally who have come out, and these girls are, I mean, they were in my life. I kind of fostered them to try to, you know, reintegrate them. That was extremely difficult for me. I had to almost pull my hair out. That's why probably I'm balding. But
You're
but
just one
it was
person.
yes, it was really difficult. So if they had gone through that rehabilitative process, you know, and they weren't treated as offenders at a young age, they would have been doing very well and studying now. Yeah.
And just a quick question, I wanted to touch on this much earlier. The prevalence of cases, is it always people who are, I mean, the stereotype or what people think is it's people who are underprivileged that end up being sexually abused or vulnerable to sexual abuse. But do you see it spread across all strata of society? Is it something, perhaps is it do people who are more privileged not talk about it? How do you see it as being spread?
So since the lockdown last year, we have received quite a few cases from, say, the Colombo society, people who are very much privileged.
Yes.
So I wouldn't say that it's only the underprivileged society.
Yeah.
It's also quite prevalent within, I mean, even like in families like yours and mine.
Yes.
But the thing is, there are a lot of family dynamics within these and politicized, and I mean, not in the sense of government political, but then family politics that come into these things that people don't want to talk about it.
Correct. Small communities, I think this is one of the biggest problems.
Yes. But children are now very much empowered. Children know.
Yes.
So they themselves want to talk about it, and you know, cousins and all of them, they want to empower the victim and, you know, start talking. So I feel that is quite good.
Yeah, I suppose that internet culture and stuff allows them in many ways to express themselves. All right, thank you so much for the very informative conversation. I learned a lot, and I hope my first thing is I wish you strength, because like I said, when I watch you on social media, I don't know how you do it sometimes, and I hope you are able to take this forward. You have a long way more to go, but I think you can really spearhead a change, so I wish you all the best.
Thank you for having me.
No problem.